He said this publicly, but why did he reach her back?
Your mom lied. That was the sentence that split my life into a before and an after. 1 second. The room was warm and noisy, full of paper plates, half-eaten cake, and people talking over each other in my mother's backyard. My daughter Sophie was standing in the middle of it all in a yellow dress with frosting on one cheek, grinning so hard her eyes were almost closed. She had just turned 5. 5. Do you know how small 5 still is? Old enough to remember a sentence forever, young enough not to understand why it hurt. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Then my husband pointed at her, not at me, at her. And in a voice loud enough to stop every conversation at once, Marcus Eden, my husband, Sophie's father, in every way that mattered, said, "That's not my child." Silence. Not normal silence. Not awkward silence. The kind that makes you hear the buzz of string lights and the scrape of someone setting down a fork 3 tables away. Sophie looked up at him, still smiling at first because she thought this had to be a joke. Then her face changed. Just a little. Her mouth trembled. "Dad!" I can still hear it. I'm Lena Eden. I was 29 that day. Marcus was 34, polished and controlled, the kind of man people trusted in 2 minutes. He worked in corporate risk management, wore calm like expensive cologne, and almost never raised his voice. That was part of why what happened felt so wrong. This wasn't a drunken rant. This wasn't a reckless outburst. It was deliberate. Like he had come there already loaded with something ugly. And the worst part, I didn't scream. I didn't lunge at him. I didn't ask him what was wrong. I reached into my purse. My fingers found the edge of a sealed envelope I had been carrying for 8 days. I didn't pull it out, not yet. I just touched it and looked at Marcus as his hand shook at his side. Because in that moment, I knew 2 things. First, he believed what he was saying. And second, he had no idea how wrong the real story actually was. 3 days later, he would open a file in his office and go completely pale. 3 days before the party, something already felt off. Not obvious, not dramatic, just wrong in a way you can't explain at first. Have you ever watched someone you know better than anyone else and suddenly felt like you're looking at a stranger wearing their face? That was Marcus. It started small. He began asking questions that didn't fit normal conversation. Not, "How was your day?" or "Did Sophie finish her homework?" No, it was things like, "Do you remember exactly what day Sophie was born? Who was in the room when you signed the paperwork? Did your mom handle everything, or did you?" At first, I laughed it off. We were busy. Life gets messy, memories blur. That's normal, right? But Marcus didn't laugh. He watched me too closely, studied my face like he was waiting for me to slip up, like there was something I was supposed to confess. And then there was the photo album. One night, I walked into the living room and found him sitting alone, flipping through Sophie's baby pictures, slowly, carefully, too carefully. His fingers paused on one photo, Sophie at a few weeks old, wrapped in a hospital blanket. "She doesn't look like me here," he said. I remember blinking at him. "She was a newborn, Marcus. Babies look like potatoes." He didn't smile. Instead, he asked quietly, "Are you sure there's nothing you forgot to tell me?" That question didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like an accusation dressed up as confusion. That's when something in my chest tightened. So I did what most people do when something feels wrong, but you don't want to face it directly. I went to my mother, Diane Keller, 54, practical, protective, the kind of woman who always had an answer unless she didn't want you to ask the question. I brought it up casually over coffee. Marcus has been acting weird about Sophie, asking about the hospital timelines. Her reaction was immediate. Too immediate. "Men get paranoid," she said, waving it off. "Ignore it." No pause, no curiosity, no "that's strange," just dismissal. And that's when it clicked. My mother wasn't surprised. She was shutting it down. A cold realization settled in. There were parts of Sophie's birth I didn't fully remember. Complications, stress, paperwork I barely saw, my mom handling things to help. So I requested the hospital records quietly, without telling anyone. When they arrived, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. At first glance, everything looked normal, until it didn't. Pages were missing, dates didn't line up, and at the bottom of one document where Marcus's name should have been clearly printed as the father, there was a blacked out section. Not smudged, not faded, blacked out on purpose. I stared at it, my heart pounding, because that wasn't an accident. That was a secret. And suddenly, Marcus's questions didn't feel so irrational anymore. They felt like the beginning of something much worse. By the time Marcus stood in front of everyone and said, "That's not my child," he wasn't guessing. He knew something. The question is, what exactly did he know and what was he missing? Because after I saw the hospital records, I stopped dismissing his behavior. I started watching him the way he had been watching me. Quietly, carefully. And that's when I found it. A receipt, folded once, tucked deep inside the drawer of his home office, under files he rarely touched. Not something meant to be found, not something meant to be shared. A private DNA testing service, dated 4 days before the party. My stomach dropped. So this wasn't paranoia, it wasn't insecurity. Marcus had already gone looking for answers and he hadn't told me. Why? What was he afraid I'd say? Or worse, what had he already discovered? I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I waited until he left for work the next morning, then went back into that drawer. That's where I found the envelope. Already opened. Inside results. Clean, clinical, final. Probability of paternity, 0%. For a moment, everything in me just stopped. No anger, no panic, just a hollow kind of silence spreading through my chest. Because I knew something Marcus didn't. I had never cheated on him, not once, not ever. So if he wasn't Sophie's biological father, then this wasn't a betrayal. It was something else, something buried, something done, and there was only one person who might know the truth. I called my mother. No small talk this time, no soft approach. "Mom," I said, my voice steady in a way that didn't match how hard my heart was pounding. "What happened at the hospital when Sophie was born?" Silence. Not confusion, not denial, silence. "Then why are you asking that?" That was it. That was the moment everything shifted from suspicion to certainty. "You handled the paperwork," I continued. "There are missing records. Marcus took a DNA test. He's not her father. So I'm asking you one more time, what happened?" Her breathing changed. I could hear it. Then she said, very quietly, "Some things are better left alone, Lena." Click. She hung up. I stood there staring at my phone, my reflection faint in the dark screen. That wasn't avoidance anymore. That was confirmation. Whatever happened, she was part of it. And now Marcus had his version of the truth, a partial truth, a dangerous one, which meant I needed the full picture fast. Because this wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. This was about identity, legal records, a child's life. So I pushed further. I ordered a full audit DNA, cross-referencing hospital logs, everything tied to Sophie's birth. No shortcuts, no assumptions. 2 days later, I got the call. The technician sounded careful, controlled. "Mrs. Eden, your daughter's DNA matches you." I closed my eyes, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But then he continued, "But there's something else in the report, something you need to see in person." A pause, not long, just long enough to tell me this wasn't going to be simple. And suddenly, Marcus's outburst at the party made terrifying sense. He had opened his results. Soon, I would open mine. 3 days after the party, I walked into Marcus's office with the truth in my hands. Not a theory, not a suspicion, a file, thick, organized, final. Have you ever known something that could dismantle everything in seconds and still chosen to carry it straight into the person who least expects it? That was me. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting behind his desk, tie loosened, eyes tired but sharp. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked prepared. "I figured you'd come," he said. Of course he did. Because in his mind, this was simple. He had his answer, his DNA test, his proof. He reached into his drawer and pulled out the same envelope I had already seen. "I didn't want to do it like that," he added, referring to the party, though we both knew that wasn't true. But I wasn't going to keep pretending. Pretending. That word hung in the air between us. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just stepped forward and placed my file on his desk, sliding it toward him. "Then don't," I said quietly. "Just read." He hesitated for a second, just one. Then he opened it. At first, his expression didn't change. Page 1, DNA confirmation. Page 2, maternal match. He skimmed quickly, like he was searching for the part that proved me wrong. Then he slowed down. His eyes caught on the hospital records. "Wait," he muttered. I said nothing. Let him piece it together. 2 births, same night, same hospital wing, similar last names, adjacent rooms, time of delivery minutes apart. His fingers tightened on the paper. "What is this?" he asked, but his voice had already started to shift. "Keep going." He flipped to the next page. Signatures, repeated, consistent. Diane Keller. My mother. Marcus leaned back slightly like the air had changed pressure. "No, that doesn't..." "Keep going," I repeated. The final pages, revised documentation, internal audit notes, and the second DNA comparison. Not Marcus. Someone else. Someone connected not to me, but to my mother's past. Marcus's face drained of color as he reached the last line. His hand, steady just minutes ago, began to shake. "This says," he whispered, eyes scanning it again, like the words might rearrange themselves into something safer. "This says Sophie she's not legally recorded correctly because the records were altered." I finished. Silence slammed into the room. Heavy, suffocating. Marcus looked up at me slowly, like he didn't recognize me anymore. Or maybe like he finally did. "What did your mother do?" he asked, his voice barely holding together. And for the first time since the party, I didn't have to guess, because now I knew exactly what she had done. "What did your mother do?" Marcus's question didn't echo this time. It just sat there, heavy, final, unavoidable. So I answered it, not in his office, not in anger. But later that same day, sitting across from my mother at her dining table, with the file open between us like evidence in a trial neither of us had agreed to, but both of us understood, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I know about the hospital," I said. "The overlapping births, the altered records. I know Sophie is mine, but not his." I paused, watching her carefully. "So I'm going to ask you once, and this time you're going to tell me everything." Diane didn't deny it. She didn't deflect. She just exhaled. And then she told me, 5 years ago, the night I gave birth was chaos. Staffing shortages, multiple emergency deliveries. One of them, a woman Diane knew from years back, went into labor the same night. Her life had been unstable, violent partner, police reports, hospital notes, flagged with concern. Her baby didn't survive. Mine did. And somewhere between grief, fear, and opportunity, my mother made a decision. She used her Access temporary paperwork handling, distracted staff, overlapping records to switch identifiers, not physically swapping babies, not something cinematic, something quieter. She altered the documentation, assigned my child a different paternal record, redirected the official trail, built a version of reality where Sophie would never be traced back to the man Diane believed would destroy her life. "And Marcus?" I asked. "You needed stability," she said. "A name, a father on paper. I gave her that." Not asked, given. That was the truth. Emotional payoff. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I just sat there feeling something colder than anger settle in because this wasn't a mistake. It was a rewrite. My daughter's identity, my marriage, my reality, all shaped by a choice I never knew existed. When I told Marcus everything, he didn't interrupt, not once. The anger he had at the party, gone. In its place, shock, and something harder to define. Loss, maybe? But when Sophie ran into the room later that night, calling Dad like nothing had changed, he still knelt down and hugged her. Not out of obligation, out of instinct. What followed wasn't simple. The hospital launched an internal investigation, records were pulled, staff questioned, Diane's actions document falsification, identity manipulation led to formal charges. Not dramatic arrests, not spectacle, just quiet, serious consequences. Marcus filed for separation, not out of cruelty, but because trust, once fractured like that, doesn't reset overnight. Legally, things became complicated. Despite the DNA, Marcus had been Sophie's recognized father for 5 years. That mattered. Courts don't erase bonds that easily. Then came the final layer. The biological father was located, alive, unaware, and suddenly our story wasn't just ours anymore. Final resolution moment. Months later, everything looked different. Not broken, but rearranged. I sat on a park bench watching Sophie chase pigeons, her laughter cutting through the air like none of this had ever touched her. Marcus sat a few feet away, not beside me, not distant either. Something in between. We spoke when needed, coordinated, existed in the same space without pretending things were the same. Because they weren't, but when Sophie tripped and looked back, she still ran to him first, and he still caught her. That didn't change. I used to think truth was something clean, something that fixed things once it came out. It's not. Sometimes it just redraws the lines. And you have to decide where you stand when everything you thought was solid turns out to be something else entirely. For me, the answer was simple. I stood where I always had, next to my daughter, no matter whose name was written on the paper.
What would you have done? Trust him again or walk away forever?